If you had 5 items and your BCBA asked you to conduct a paired choice preference assessment, how would you conduct the assessment? What is the question asking? That's always where we should start. What is our question asking? Well, the question is asking how you would conduct the assessment. So immediately you should say, well, what assessment? So if we go back and look through, we want to conduct a paired choice preference assessment, also known as a forced choice preference assessment. And in a paired choice or a forced choice, what are we doing? Well, we're presenting 2 items at once to a client or a learner and having them choose one of them. And then we're doing that over and over again until what? Until we've paired every single item together, and then we make a hierarchy. So if we have 5 items, we're going to present all 5 items together in pairs of 2 until they've all been compared against one another. So that's what we're looking for in our answer. So let's look at A. Introduce each item one at a time to the client and record how long they interact with it. What's wrong with A? One of the secrets to getting really good at the exam is when you're practicing, don't just identify the right answer. Understand why is the wrong answer wrong. So A says introduce each item one at a time. Well, we don't want to do that because we're conducting a paired choice. We need to introduce 2 items at a time. B, present 2 items at a time, but only present each item once. If we have 5 items and we need to compare every item to all the other items, there's no way we can present each item once. Item 1 is going to have to be presented 4 times because we have to present it with 2, 3, 4, and 5. So B, we're not presenting them enough. C, present 2 items at a time until each item has been presented with all other items. Now we're talking, right? We're presenting 2 items at a time and presenting it to the point where we've presented each item together. And then D, lay all the items on the table and ask your client to pick their favorite. If we were to put all the items out, 3 or more, on an array or on a table, that would be a multiple stimulus preference assessment, not what we're looking for. So if we're going to conduct a paired choice preference assessment, we have to go with C. Present 2 items at a time until each item has presented with all other items. An intervention calls for RBTs to deliver Legos as a reinforcer every 5 minutes to a client. However, the data indicates the client's behavior is decreasing since the intervention started. What is the most likely explanation? There is this idea in ABA, and if you take your BCBA exam one day, you'll have to know it, of parsimony, where we're trying to find the simplest explanation first, the one with the least amount of assumptions. So if we're looking at our question here, how can we explain this? Well, what are we doing? We are delivering Legos as a reinforcer every 5 minutes to a client, but the client's behavior is decreasing. So what do we know about consequences? What do we know about reinforcement? What do we know about punishment? We know we can only classify something as reinforcing or punishing if we know how future behavior is impacted. So even though we're saying we're going to deliver Legos as a reinforcer, we know that the Legos are actually leading to the behavior decreasing. Because after we started the intervention, all of a sudden this behavior is decreasing. So the Legos are not serving as reinforcement. If anything, they're serving as punishment because this behavior is decreasing. Remember, we're looking at future behavior. So what is the most likely explanation? A, the Legos are having no effect on the client's behavior. Well, we wouldn't say that because once the intervention started, that behavior started to decrease. B, the Legos are acting as a punisher. That is the most likely explanation. If the Legos are the consequence, and after delivering the consequence for a while, or however long the intervention has been going on, the behavior is decreasing, we could say the Legos are potentially functioning as a punisher. What about the Legos are acting as reinforcers? Well, we wouldn't want to say that because the behavior is decreasing, not increasing. And then D, the reinforcement schedule is incorrect. We're not looking at any sort of response issues here. We're looking at future behavior, and we're looking at future behavior specifically decreasing. And when future behavior specifically decreases, what we say about the consequence is that it's most likely punishing. So actually delivering Legos every 5 minutes to a client appears to be decreasing the behavior. It appears to be punishing the behavior. A parent says their child screams several times every hour. If you wanted to get a precise measurement of screaming, what measurement should you use? Okay. we need to measure our screaming and we want to be precise. So if we're going to be precise, let's use continuous measurement. So if we look at our answer choices, we have frequency, rate, duration, and latency. Now, if the child is screaming several times every hour, are you going to be measuring how long they're screaming for, or are we going to try to count? Well, most likely count, right? You want to get a precise measurement of the screaming, and they're saying it happens several times every hour. So let's see how many times it happens, right? So if we're going to count, what can we eliminate? We can eliminate duration. Duration is a length of time, okay? And we can eliminate latency. Latency is the time in between the SD and the first response. Remember, the child screams several times. We want to get precise measurements of this word several. So we need to know exactly how often. So now we have frequency and rate. Could you use frequency? Sure, you could count how many times they scream. But notice how the parent says the child screams several times every hour. What does the every hour represent? Well, it represents a time component. And what is rate? Rate is simply frequency with the time component added. Rate's going to be more precise. So if we wanted to get the precise measurement, we might as well go with rate. We have our frequency, and then we have a time component every hour. So if we took frequency data and found that the client screamed 10 times, we could make it a rate by saying 10 times per hour. So if you wanted to get the most precise measurement possible, you should use B, rate. Which of the following scenarios best represents the Premack principle? Now, this is where fluency really, really comes into play. I always say the most important thing about the exam is fluency. If you're not fluent, the exam is really hard. If you're fluent, the exam is much, much easier. Okay? When people ask me, why did I fail? I always say, go back, check your fluency. Because if you don't know what the Premack principle is, well, you're already lost. You're already behind here. And this question is going to take you a long, long time. When in reality, it shouldn't. Because what is Premack principle? Premack principle, also known as Grandma's law, is simply saying we're using access to a preferred activity as reinforcement for engaging in a non-preferred activity. So if we want to find the scenario that best represents that, we need to find a scenario where someone is gaining access to something for engaging in a most likely less preferred activity. So A, while sitting at her desk, Cynthia raises her hand to give an answer. The teacher calls on her and then praises her for answering correctly. Is Cynthia getting access to anything? No. This is simply just a straightforward, run-of-the-mill behavior scenario. B, at the dinner table, one brother says to the other, tell me your name, tell me your favorite color, and give me a glass of milk. What do we think the brother is trying to attempt? Well, he says, tell me name, tell me color, get me a glass of milk. To me, this looks like a high probability request sequence. Tell me your name, high P. Tell me your favorite color, high P. Give me a glass of milk, low P. Not Premack principle. Remember, Premack principle and high P sequence are almost opposites, right? C, after being bitten by a mosquito, John starts to itch the bite until it stops itching. John is just a basic scenario. Bit by a mosquito, itch the bite stops itching, not to engage in any other activity. So that leaves us with D. Joey's girlfriend tells him he needs to mow the lawn and then he can play PlayStation with his friends. Joey's girlfriend is using the Premack principle. I'll let you play PlayStation with your friends. First, you need to mow the lawn. Grandma's law, I'll let you eat ice cream. First, eat your broccoli. So which of the following scenarios best represents the Premack principle? It's going to be D. Joey's girlfriend tells him he needs to mow the lawn and then he can play PlayStation with his friends. When I pick up my daughter, she smiles. When she smiles, I start to laugh. When I laugh, she starts to laugh. What is the antecedent to me laughing? Whenever you get a behavior question, especially a behavior question with two or more people, identify what person they're talking about. First things first. The antecedent to who laughing? Me. So I. That's the behavior we're looking at. Antecedent is what? Antecedent, of course, is what happens right before the behavior. In this case, me laughing. So let's find me laughing. Well, I pick up my daughter, smiles. When she smiles, I start to laugh. Here we go. What is the antecedent to me starting to laugh? Well, when she smiles. So what is the antecedent? My daughter smiling. Easy question. I mean, a 1 or a 2 on the difficulty scale. If you don't understand this question, you need to go back, get more fluent. Super easy question. Again, 1 to 2 difficulty scale. This is a question you need to get 100 out of 100 times. Easy points, nothing to it. Okay. Antecedent right before, laughing, she smiles. What is the antecedent? My daughter smiling. Which of the following behaviors would be the worst to measure with permanent product? What are our rules about permanent product? Well, first, what is permanent product? Permanent product, we're measuring the outcome of the behavior, the product of the behavior. So we're measuring after the behavior occurs. We know we don't have to see the behavior occur, but it has to produce something permanent and tangible that we can obviously measure. So we want to find something that's going to consistently produce an outcome that's measurable. So A, cleaning a desk. Can I measure cleaning a desk? Sure. My desk right now is dirty. If I left and my wife cleaned it and I came home, I could measure that permanently. B, having a conversation. Think about all the conversations you wish you could measure from people you know, bosses, colleagues that you can't. Why? Because conversations are fleeting. Unless you're recording it, which is probably not happening, right? So given that we probably aren't recording it, a conversation is going to be very difficult to measure permanently. Even me talking right now, the only thing that's permanent about this is going to be the recording. If the recording goes away, then this what I'm saying right now cannot be measured. B or C, taking a quiz. One of the best ways to use permanent product is quizzes or exams. D, baking a cake. Baking a cake produces an actual cake, right? Get all the ingredients together. I don't have to watch you make it. I can just come home, have a cake ready. Okay. So if we're going to pick the worst behavior to measure with permanent product, it's easily going to be B, having a conversation. It just goes into the wind, right? It's nearly impossible to measure permanently. Look at the graph below. Calculate the average frequency over the 5 sessions. I always say this, you have to know averages, you have to know totals, okay? How do we find averages? We take all of our data points, add them together, and then divide by the total number of data points. So in this case, we have 5 sessions. Those are our data points. And we have our data. So we're going to add 5 plus 3 plus 6 plus 5 plus 9. It's going to give us 28 total frequency. Divide it by our data points, 5. It's going to give us 5.6. Not 5, not 6.6, not 28, which is our total, 5.6. You need to know averages. You need to know how to find average frequency, duration, latency, rate, and interresponse time. Hint, average never changes. If you don't know how to find average, go learn it. Learn it. It's important. Okay. Again, add up all your data points, divide it by the total number of data points, and that's going to give you your average frequency. So in this case, the average frequency is 5.6. You want your client to speak louder. How would you shape the magnitude of the speaking behavior? Now, we went over this last video. What is magnitude? Magnitude is intensity, level, loud, soft, hard, soft. Magnitude is measuring the intensity of the behavior. So in this case, we want to shape the magnitude of the behavior, in this case, louder. We want our client to speak louder. And how do we shape behavior? We shape behavior by reinforcing approximations of what we want to see. In this case, we want to see louder speech. So A, reinforce the client when they say buh, then reinforce when they say bub, then reinforce when they say bubble. Are we changing the magnitude here? We are not. We're changing the response. We're not getting any indication of the client's volume or intensity here, okay? You have to be careful. We're simply just changing the response here. B, reinforce the client for screaming, then for speaking at a normal volume, and then finally for speaking at a whisper. Are we shaping? We are. Are we shaping to get louder? We're not. We're going from screaming to a normal volume and then to a whisper. Understanding what the question is asking is important for this reason. Yes, we're shaping, but it's not our goal. We want to go louder. C, reinforce the client for speaking, then reinforce the client for speaking louder, then reinforce the client for speaking at your preferred volume. There we go, right? We have our speaking, whatever it starts with. We get them louder, and then we finally get them to our preferred volume. So we're shaping the magnitude to get louder. So we're doing both. We're shaping and we're getting our goal. And then D, you cannot shape magnitude. Not true. You can easily shape magnitude just by doing what we're doing in C. Slowly reinforce until we get to our preferred destination. Thinking about how to solve a math problem will be considered a what? Now, this is more of a tricky question. This is more of a BCBA question. But I always like to give educational questions. Remember, this is practice. We need to learn, right? So In ABA, we have things we consider public behaviors, and we have things we consider private behaviors. Public behaviors are observable and measurable by everybody. Private behaviors are not. With that said, if we're thinking about how to solve a math problem, would that be public or would that be private? Well, thinking, can I observe you thinking? Not really. I mean, you could be sitting there and I can guess that you're thinking, but I can't observe you thinking. So is it public? It's not. Thinking is private. Overt is the same as public. Observable, same as public. Will you need to know this for your RBT exam? Maybe not, but just understand we have public and private events. Thinking is a private event. Thinking is a private behavior. Also,